our series. My name is Dawn Troutman. I'm your host for this series, and today I'm coming to join you from the Greater Milwaukee Synod. This initiative is a dynamic partnership between the ELCA Youth Ministry Network, the ELCA and its youth gathering, and the ELCA seminaries and colleges. Practice Discipleship offers leadership development for the sake of faith formation. This year's theme is Story. We're in the midst of a series of 7 webinars that focus on Lutheran theology, ministry theory, and practical skills relating to our theme. Today's webinar is titled Story of Scripture, and our presenter today is Dr. Julia Lambert Fogg, Assistant Professor of Religion at California Lutheran University. You will be able to ask questions and make comments as we go. If you look at the right side of your screen, there is a box where you can type in questions. Please do type in questions. There also will be time that Julia asks for your feedback, and we'd love to have your feedback as well. When I see it there, I'll repeat it so that Julia can answer or make any comments back or answer your questions. So we'll get to as many questions and comments as possible, but let's go ahead. Welcome, Julia.
Hey, thanks so much, Dawn. I'm really excited to be here and to be part of this initiative. This is some really exciting curriculum. What I'll be walking us through today is a focus on what I'm calling border crossing. And if we look at Scripture, we really start to see a pattern of how God crosses borders to reach us, how Jesus in his ministry crosses borders to reach other people, and then even how the disciples cross borders to reach out and fulfill Matthew's Great Commission to make disciples of all people. So what I've done is I've picked a selection of scripture passages. So we'll be looking at Genesis, we'll be looking at Exodus, and we'll be looking at a little bit in Matthew. And we'll use these texts to see how God is crossing borders and what happens when God crosses those borders.
Wonderful.
Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, in the beginning. So we're going to start with Genesis. It's actually, God's border crossing starts with verse 1. In Genesis 1, the Spirit is hovering over the border, over the tohu vabohu, which in Hebrew is the formless and void area. And as God is hovering over that deep, that depth of waters and formlessness, then God begins to speak. So we actually have words taking shape, and we have the seas and the land and the light, and everything begins to take shape. But if we think about creation, what's happening is an amalgam or a mess of stuff without borders slowly comes to have borders and boundaries that define different areas. So if we take the next verse, and God named the darkness and the light, gives each its boundaries, and then calls it good. So from the beginning we have this idea that God is creating good boundaries that allow us to see the sun, that allow us to be part of the light, that allow darkness and time of rest at night. And then next, God will divide and separate this light and darkness. And then God will actually start to form creatures, speaking into this vastness of light and dark. And as God is creating creatures, if you think about it, the creatures and the plants and everything else in creation is inhabiting both the dark and the light. That is, moving across the boundaries that God has set up. And so after we continue, God will set the boundaries of daytime, nighttime, will set the boundaries of the week, first day, second day, third day, and human life is actually living across those boundaries. So crossing boundaries is part of God's own purpose, just as having that orderly creation is part of God's purpose. And then our next story comes to us from Exodus. So I want you all to think right now about all you know about Exodus, all of the ideas and all of the images that you get from Exodus. And even if you are leading some youth or some other folks in a study, this would be an appropriate place. You can take out a short passage from Exodus and look at those. But basically what we have in Exodus is the quintessential border crossing. Okay? So we have God's people called to cross a border. So on the next slide, I will ask you some questions. Are you ready, Dawn?
I hope so. Ooh.
Okay. So what we want to think about is what borders the Jews must cross to leave Egypt. And in Egypt, they're going through all sorts of things. So we want to remember that they are enslaved. We want to remember that the midwives are commanded to harm the children who are born to the Jews, Moses, who grows up in Pharaoh's house. So I'm wondering what ideas you all are coming up with for what border crossings are happening as the Jews are getting ready to leave Egypt and then coming out of Egypt.
So please do write into the box on the right about what borders you're crossing. And I'm guessing, Julia, you mean not just literal political borders on a map, but other types of borders as well?
That's exactly right. Yep, you've got it. So we have geographical, physical borders. There may even be some mental, psychological borders that are crossed. And they don't all have to be positive. There are certainly some negative border crossings happening in Exodus as well.
So one type of border would be from slave to free. You have to make kind of a psychological jump. And then Samantha wrote a cultural border. Thank you, Samantha. And
Yeah,
Lisa
exactly.
said, yes, Lisa said the comfort of life as we know it. That's like everyone's border that I've ever met, right?
That's totally true, and sets me up beautifully. Thank you.
Lisa, A+.
Way to go. Stepping outside of our comfort zones is huge. So if you think about that in terms of slavery, and we put that together with Samantha's comment, stepping outside of the comfort zone of a place we inhabit that isn't even a good place to be, but it's comfortable, we know it, we recognize it, we know what's going to happen. So
great. And I'll just, Lavon is agreeing with you. She wrote, the border of self-knowledge as a people enslaved to knowing themselves as free people and actually also becoming a people rather than individuals in slavery. Thank you, Lavon.
Yeah. Very nice. So how do we cross the border of our own individual sense of self and come into a sense of ourselves as belonging to a larger people? So that could be a border of conversion for some people coming into a church congregation for the first time or a faith community for the first time.
Yes, yes. So let's keep going, and if you have other comments on the line, please jump in or jump in on the next question. It's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and you all have the picture in front of you now of crossing the border of the Red Sea. So here we go to the more literal border crossings and crossing a geographical boundary. And this Red Sea was a showstopper for the Jews. When they got there, they were, we can't go any further. And this reminds us that when we reach those crossings or those borders that we don't think we can get to the other side of, God will find a way, and often makes it God's purpose to lead across. So Dawn, as you look at this picture, which direction are the people walking? Are they walking towards us, or are they walking the other way?
I feel like it's an entire personality test. I feel like they're walking toward, I feel like I see faces at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. They're walking towards us. So where is God?
So then God is behind.
God is behind them. And that's really an interesting reminder as well, because when we get to a point where we can't move on any further and God makes a way through, then all of a sudden we have to step out of our comfort zone on the land and walk through these walls of water and where are we going, and will the water come crashing down, and where is God? We can't see God anymore. And the reminder is God is behind us, protecting the rear, if you will.
And no one will sneak up
from behind. Exactly.
Catherine wrote that she has this picture hanging in her office and it's always been important to her. So.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I love this piece. Yeah. Yeah. So if we move from the Red Sea to the next picture, we get, we were just in the thick of it, and now we sort of do the 10,000 or 20,000 feet or however far above we are, right? Yeah. And now what we can see, the red line that is going across all of this geographical area, the Sinai Peninsula, you can see the wandering, right? So we have this quick crossing of the sea, and then all of a sudden the Jews aren't on a road anymore. You can see that there are topographically, under the wilderness of Paran, there are mountains. So the Jews are wandering all around and not getting to the promised land right away. So sometimes a boundary can be, we are stuck in the same place for a while. And how will God make a way through that place where we are stuck? And what has to happen? And this is where we can shift again our sense of what we're doing from the individual to the people. Sometimes it takes a generation or more to get out of a stuck place. We witness this in politics a lot, so I'll just leave that to everyone's imagination.
We had this comments, people are stuck in the used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, what used to be, what's familiar, and how do you get beyond that? And oftentimes it's helping each other to get beyond it.
Yes.
Yeah. Another set of boundaries, if we leave the map for a second, and we go, here we're at Mount Sinai, and Moses looks larger than life. I assure you, he was just a regular human being, although a great prophet. And here we have the boundary of a couple things. If you recall this story, and you can go read through it again, I think it's around chapter 22 or in that area, what happens here is God draws a boundary around the base of Mount Sinai and says, do not cross it. And that's to indicate the holiness of God and to show the people how powerful this God is whom they've followed across all these borders. And that border, that holiness or sacred border, is set up between where the divine is appearing or descending and occupying space and where the people can go. And the idea is if the people cross this line, I often imagine it as a police line in the neighborhood, if the people cross this line, they will be totally incinerated by the holiness that is present in that place. Now this is a little bit deeper idea, but the idea is we can't know God directly face to face in our human form, right? That boundary of being human means that we are limited to occupy these bodies in this space, in this gender, in this culture, in this ethnicity, in this color of eyes. We are limited by our human being. And God then comes to us in this amazing mountain space to reach across that boundary, but without incinerating us. Right? So God has to find ways to meet us within our limited form when God's self is completely unlimited and without boundaries. So there's always that tension in how we get to know God and learn about God. Yeah. Are there any questions to this point that people are raising?
Not at this point, but please do, if you're listening, type in questions and I'll make sure that Julia gets to them. Thank you.
All right. Great. Let's go to the next slide. So now I'm going to ask questions since other people are. This will prompt some discussion, hopefully.
Good.
But if Exodus means crossing borders to become God's people and in a generation to leave behind slavery and that mentality and what it means to not be free, and then to come into freedom and be named for the God we follow, how do we relate that to ourselves? And what borders are we crossing as God's children? Any ideas out there?
Well, there's a bit of a cultural border. You know, you're sort of in the secular culture, and everybody is to some degree, and then you're stepping into it as a child of God. That's a border.
Yeah, secularism is a big border, yeah.
Yes. Some people just have a practicality of meeting with their faith community face-to-face can be a bit of a border, depending on what sort of commute or physical things might be in the way.
Yeah, we've really gotten away from the experience of a parish community where everybody in the neighborhood goes to the same church. So some of the boundaries that we experience as people of faith are actually ecumenical, right? So the Lutherans over here, the Methodists over here, the Quakers over there, the this, the that. And one of the boundaries that many people are working on as we think about being God's children is how do we bring our church resources together to serve the community, right? To step out of our own faith, but united with people, with other people of faith, even if they're coming from different traditions. And that takes some careful negotiation.
It does, and it feeds well into what Wendy wrote, which is we cross a border between love in action and apathy. That's real good.
Oh,
and
that's
then,
nice.
Yeah, and then they're all good. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be commenting on some instead of others. But Levon wrote, we cross the border to trust into God's and Christ's promises. Thank you, Wendy and Levon.
Yeah, and that fear, trust, sort of two sides of the same coin, to step out of one's fear into trust. Often you have to step before you have the trust.
Right.
Right? You cultivate the trust by stepping out even in fear. So yeah, there's a way in which all of those borders are present in every part of our lives. So we could go on for hours here, but let's move to the lives of real people. So we've moved from Genesis and creation, we've moved through Exodus and talking about peoplehood. Now let's look at one family story in a real setting. So the next slide will have, I think, a passage for us. Oh no, we're going to start with refugees. Let's start with
Can I jump in with, I'm sorry. Yes. This one came in, and I do want to get it into the last question that we talked about. Kenna wrote, speaking of partnering with other denominations, the Episcopals and Lutherans in Aurora, Colorado are doing this, and she leads one youth ministry for both churches. Thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. And what a great witness for youth to experience working together across ecumenical borders.
Yes, so thank you. Move on. Thank you.
All right, moving on. Let's talk about refugees. Next slide. This country was founded on refugees. What is a refugee, and what kind of borders do refugees cross?
I think of it as a political thing.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Political borders are really important, especially today. We have so many folks flooding in, from Africa, flooding into Europe. We have folks from Latin America flooding into the United States. Yeah, political boundaries.
Yes.
All right, well, I'm going to let you all think about that one and move into an example of a refugee on our next slide.
Ooh, Lisa is saying there are cultural boundaries. And then back to Kenna from Aurora, she's actually bringing Episcopals to the ELCA youth gathering. So she's saying we have a lot of refugees.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think, as I said, the Exodus is sort of the quintessential border crossing for God's people.
Yes.
But if you think about it, the incarnation itself is a border crossing. God crossing the boundary between the divine and the human and coming into humanity. So let's look at Matthew 2. And in this case, I'm going to ask you to open your minds a little bit and just listen to this story. Dawn, do you want to read the slide for us?
Sure. When the Magi had departed, an angel from the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod will soon search for the child in order to kill him." Joseph got up and, during the night, took the child and his mother to Egypt. He stayed there until Herod died. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, I have called my son out of Egypt.
Thank you. Here we have a typical refugee situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Herod is going to try and kill children. That exists in the world today, where children and the safety of families are threatened in a war zone or an economic situation. The person in power, the king of that area or the governor or whatever, isn't protecting the innocent or the vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so here's a case where Jesus is part of that family. And the parents, and Joseph especially, takes charge and they flee, right? And then they stay in Egypt until Herod dies. Okay, so here we have, I love this, the image of the Holy Family wandering among the pyramids.
The actual pyramids.
The actual pyramids. If you think about this, that means that Jesus is growing up Egyptian.
Right.
Right? He's growing up hybrid with a dual, not a dual citizenship. We don't know if he has papers in Egypt, but he's definitely growing up with a dual identity.
So Kinna wrote in, I have two comments, but Kinna's actually speaks to your point right now. The Indonesia, Africa, Latin America, they try to deal with cultural, or they have to deal with cultural boundaries, trying to uphold their family's culture while also being an Americanized culture. So that's one of the things that refugees deal with. Catherine wrote that where she is in Southern California, she sees a lot of people coming in as refugees who are fleeing for economic and safety concerns, just like Jesus. Yes.
Just like Jesus. And we hear so much, I'm in California too, and we hear so much about the drug trafficking and everything on the border, and the mafia making it impossible for families to actually keep their children safe in northern Mexico. So, yeah, these are contemporary issues. Let's see what we have on the next slide.
That's exciting.
Here we go. So we'll continue a little bit. I'll read this one. When Herod knew that the Magi had fooled him, he grew very angry. He sent soldiers to kill all the children in Bethlehem and in all the surrounding territory who were 2 years old and younger, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. So a couple things here. Again, we have the parallels of the ruler and the vulnerable are not protected. But we also have a parallel to the Exodus story, where Pharaoh was asking the midwives, the Jewish midwives, to kill the male children as they were born. And then we have the second parallel, right? So that was affecting the Jewish children. The second parallel to Exodus is Passover, right? When the angel of death or God passes over Egypt and slays all of the firstborn Egyptians. This is something that one can read as punishment, or one can read as divine retribution, or whatever. But it's very difficult today to read that story without having some compassion for the families who lost those children on both sides, Jewish and Egyptian. So it's a reminder, I think, to us that there are innocent children, but there is no innocent politics. We can all be involved in the dangers that cause the refugee floods in certain places. Yeah. So let's keep going.
Beautiful.
Isn't that gorgeous? Another Holy Family crossing the border. You see in the background the pyramids, right?
Yes.
And this is good with youth to just see what they see in this picture. One of the things that I like to highlight in this slide is how chaotic it feels to be a refugee. The Cubist art really conveys that. And at the same time, you have the dove down in the corner and a cross-eyed donkey. I'm not sure what the cross-eyed donkey is for, but you have the dove in the presence of God, even in the midst of the confusion of flight. Yeah. Let's take the next slide. Dawn, you want to read this one?
Yes, I will. I just want to jump in with Samantha's
yeah.
comment. The church can be a place of refuge for people who are social refugees, people who are lost or don't fit the image of society's normal. People who have made mistakes and become social pariahs can also seek peace, love, forgiveness, and a second chance in a church family. And then Catherine just had a very quick comment about that slide that I put it back up there. That it appears Jesus has ashes on his forehead. So thank you, Catherine, for pointing that out.
Nice. Nice observation. Yeah.
So Matthew 2:19-21. After King Herod died, an angel from the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. "Get up," the angel said, "and take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel. Those who were trying to kill the child are dead." Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel.
Yeah, thank you. And we often think, well, we have two conflicting ideas in America, right, in the United States. One is that we are a nation of immigrants, and we are so proud of that dynamic, right, and all the diversity that that entails. At the same time, we forget that immigrants often just want to go home. Some are coming and they just want to be in a different place. But today, when we have so many immigrants who come seeking shelter, and we are afraid that they will stay and take jobs and all of these things, sometimes that fear is something that we have to step out from, and remember that many of them would go home if they could. The other thing I want to highlight from this passage is that we don't know how long the family lived in Egypt. We don't know what it was like for them. We do know that by the first century there had been at least 500 to 700 years of Jewish presence in Egypt, in near Alexandria and around that area. So it's possible that that Jesus and his family had a strong Jewish neighborhood that they lived in, but they also probably were trading and doing business with the Egyptians and with other refugees around that area. So that, again, that biculturality that's so true for so many families living in America is important to see. It's important to see ourselves in the scripture and in Jesus' experience here. Good. Let's keep going. Yeah. All right. I love this one too. Just a reminder of the complexities of ethnicity, and that when God incarnates in all of our communities and all of our cultures.
And just as we look at this and so many, do you have a link to the artwork, or are there any consistent artists we could give people a link to?
Oh, you know what? I would be happy to prepare that if I can.
Wonderful.
And give people the URLs. Yeah.
Great. So that will be on the Facebook page and on the Practice Discipleship page as soon as we have that. If you're listening after the fact, it's going to be there by then. So thank you. And then Samantha wrote that Jesus and his parents must have spent a good portion of his childhood on the road, moving across political and cultural borders. Thank you, Samantha.
Yes. Yeah, and she leads us to our next slide. Yeah.
Great. And then Levon, I love that so many people are commenting. I'm sorry I keep interrupting you, Julia.
Oh, this is great.
These are such great comments from everyone. Levon wrote, it's also important for us to remember that we as Americans did not enter into an empty land. Let us not forget those from whom we took the land and turned into refugees in their own land. Thank you, Levon.
Oh, that's a very nice comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's keep going, but please keep commenting. We love it. Keep going.
All right, next slide. This is the return trip, right? So this is, remember, we're in Matthew for this particular story. It's not reported in any of the other Gospels, so we have to look at this piece in Matthew. So remember that Herod was in Bethlehem, and that's where the Holy Family fled. So they're going south from Bethlehem and a little bit west, down into Egypt, and then eventually coming back up and going up to Nazareth. Now, this map is actually wrong for Matthew because there's no coming down from Nazareth to Bethlehem in the Gospel of Matthew. That's in Luke. So what happens when we think about Matthew and the Holy Family doing this refugee march is they're starting in Bethlehem, going down into Egypt and living there for some time. Could be 5 years, could be 7 years, could be 12 years. Then they come back up, and they're not going to go into Bethlehem. It's still too dangerous. They're going to continue north up to Nazareth. Next slide. But when he heard that Archelaus ruled over Judea in place of his father Herod, Joseph was afraid to go there, so he's not going back to Bethlehem. Having been warned in a dream, he went to another region north of Judea. This is Galilee. And Joseph settled his family in a city called Nazareth. So this refugee family is now twice removed, right? They're going into the Galilee. The Galilee, I like to call it the Wild West of the first century. It was really a pioneer land in many ways, but it was also, the Galilee had a lot of hills, and that's where people who were fleeing from Roman law would go hide out. There were a lot of different cultures circulating in the Galilee, and that exposure to the seedier side of folks who were trying to get out of Judea, but also well-established families and other folks who were trying to make a go of it. All of that existed around where Jesus was growing up in this second refugee situation.
Wonderful. And Susan wrote, I can imagine that living as refugees for so long contributed to the whole family's outlook on being inclusive and welcoming to the stranger, and Jesus consistently shows his disciples. Thank you, Susan.
Very nice. Yeah. And those are the choices, right? If you're a refugee, do you open your home even if you've experienced your home being, other homes being closed to you? So that's important to think about too. What choices do we make in crossing boundaries? And are we willing to accept hospitality from others? Right? So it's one thing, especially in the Lutheran tradition, we are amazing at hospitality. I'm not actually Lutheran, so I can say that as a praise of the Lutheran tradition. Hospitality is big.
Yes.
But often in the Lutheran tradition, we don't think about what it means to be a guest and how exercising those muscles of learning to be a guest in someone else's home is a kind of border crossing and is a different kind of vulnerability than inviting people into our own home. And I think both exercises are good practice. So here we have Google Maps.
The way that Jesus found his way home.
Yeah. I wanted y'all to see that this is 155 kilometers. By car, it's almost 2 hours, depending on the traffic, 3 hours, 4 hours, depending on the roadblocks.
Yes.
Right? So this is the area they're walking through to get up to Nazareth. And you can see there's a little gray dotted border up there in al-Fam, which we can think about as marking the border between Judea and Galilee. So you can see he's well into Galilee. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay. What I want to argue in this whole presentation is that God's pattern of border crossing, or what we can call the Exodus pattern of immigration and migration, shapes Jesus's human experience. And here, I'll give you a second to look at the bullet points. You can always expand this and have a little more discussion if you're leading a group on this, or ask them to generate these comparisons together. But this is a comparison of what's going on in the Exodus crossing and how Jesus is experiencing that in the Matthew story. One of the things I want to point out, and I said I was going to give you space and I'm going to keep talking. You can pause me if you want later on.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to point out is what I'm reading in the Gospel of Matthew. I'm not claiming that Matthew intended it to be read this way. I think out of my experience in working with immigrants and undocumented in Pasadena outside of LA has helped me to see how these stories are present in the scriptures. Matthew wanted to show that Jesus was following the same path as his ancestors had, and that God, the way God had called Israel and the Jews out of Egypt, Jesus was inhabiting that march of the people. And so the experience of Jesus is embodying that people's experience. That's Matthew's goal. But what we can see if we look through the refugee lens are these parallels back and forth between God's work crossing borders to lead the people out of Egypt and slavery, and God's work incarnate as a child to cross borders and then end up in another place entirely. So foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. That experience is important when we think about how we love our neighbor.
And Samantha, drawing on that whole idea of the experiences, wrote, God really made sure his son experienced the breadth of hardship and human emotion in the world at that time. Thank you, Samantha.
Oh, that's well put. Yeah, thank you. All right, I think we should move to the next one. Now we go to the lives of real people. So what I gave you above is the real people example in the scriptures with Jesus. And now I want to look at another context for immigrants. And this is another family story today. And I just want to introduce this by saying, as I alluded to, I teach and work in Southern California. I'm actually from the East Coast. But coming to California, I began working with Spanish-speaking congregation in Pasadena. And what I learned from these families is a completely different way of understanding Scripture through that migrant experience. Right? Yeah, we can go to the next slide. There we have immigration, and again, the Statue of Liberty. See all the little tiny people there visiting the Statue of Liberty.
Right.
So the next slides are exploring this idea, not even idea, the reality that so many people go through. So here's another family, and what's helpful is to compare this family crossing the border to Jesus and Mary and Joseph. And one of the contrasts, of course, is this is a single father, or seems to be a father with two children. Notice that he only has 1 gallon bottle of water, or a couple gallons of water. That's not going to cut it. They're not going to make it across the desert. And then this sign below, you know, it is hopefully an opportunity for self-reflection about our own politics and how we reach out. It says caution, and then below it, prohibido, which means prohibited. And I'm not sure how you can prohibit a family. So just the way that sign is worded really brings to light the need for compassion. And I don't want to take on the politics of, do we need stronger borders? Yes, probably. Do we need more? Of course. I don't want to take a political stand on U.S. policy and borders. But what I want to do as a person of faith is to think about what is being portrayed and how we are treating guests and being hosts and vice versa in our own country. So move to the next one. Yeah. So here again we have a different situation of migrants crossing the desert. Another point of reflection. Next slide. One of the places you can go for more information is the Pew Research Center. And so this is one graphic that I've pulled from them. And we can include that URL too on the Facebook.
Thank you.
Dawn, if you want to do that.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. But I think what this shows is the crisis as of 2014 and the elevated numbers of folks who are crossing the border. Minors are under age 17, and there are so many of them just coming across the border now, 15,000 in the last 10 years or so. Any questions or thoughts coming across to us?
I think people are being a little more reflective. It's become very real.
Yeah, yeah, very real. In the Lutheran Church, of course, we can think about all the ways in which Lutheran immigrants came to the United States, and that can be an opportunity to invite youth to look back into their own past and identify with grandparents who have crossed borders. Yes. Again, since I'm in California, we have a lot of Lutheran immigrants coming from the Midwest. So after a couple generations in Minnesota, they might decide to come out and explore the farmland in California. And that's what happened to bring Cal Lutheran to light, where I teach. We've grown up in this place from the ranch of a Pedersen. So we can look back into our own histories with our youth and say, how did this experience of being a migrant people in our own families take place, and maybe interview some of our grandparents.
And even in the Midwest, I think you see the evidence of the immigration when there's a lutefisk dinner at Christmas.
Absolutely, yeah. And the minor tiffs of the Germans over the Finns and the Danish, and everybody disagrees about which dish is best.
Yes, so fun.
So the final place that I want to land is with some theological reflection on the Incarnation. And I think I said this earlier, but to me, the Incarnation is really the greatest border crossing there ever was. And we can't completely understand it because, as I said before, we have limited human bodies, we have a limited intellect. We have to learn things through Scripture and learn things that God reveals to us in our relationships with each other and in our relationship to nature. But one of the things we can affirm is that God does not stand still, and God does not remain across the river. God is always finding ways to enter into our lives and to create broader relationships with us. So let's go to the next slide.
I want to jump in with Samantha's comment. She said, put yourself in the shoes of someone doing what they think is best for their family's survival. Like Joseph going to Egypt and then avoiding Bethlehem. They don't want to leave, but they feel like they have to. No one goes through that kind of danger because they want to. Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah. And even if we want to harden the politics of our borders, and we see that that is important, we can still cultivate the compassion, I think, for the family's choice. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see if I have the scripture on the next slide. Nope, we're going back. All right. Give me that border back again. I wanted to read a little bit of John 1 with you, right? So in the beginning was the Word. And this takes us back to Genesis. And the Word becomes flesh and dwelt among us. So here we have an image of Jesus ministering to disciples. You have people, old, young, you have men, women. There's probably some children back there that you can't see because they're all huddled down or resting in a lap somewhere. But the Word becoming flesh is a very important border crossing. Next slide. Another place we can look to spend some time thinking about the Incarnation is in Paul's letter to the Philippians. And I love this passage. So what's going on here is that in the Philippians hymn, in 2 verses 5 through 11, Paul is telling the Philippians how they can further embody Christ in their common lives with each other. And he says, if you practice prayer together, and if you practice supporting one another's ministry, and if you welcome one another, and you're willing to be a guest, in all of these ways throughout the 4 chapters of Philippians, Paul is really exploring how to embody the mind of Christ. But here in these short verses, he gives us a succinct statement of what that mind looks like. Let the same mind be in you all that was in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death. And it continues, even death on a cross. What I've done in separating out the bullet points on this slide is to really slow us down and see the different self-limitations or borders that Jesus accepted in order to enact service to the rest of us, service to neighbor. So there are ways in which we can try out different forms and social roles, crossing out of our own comfort zone into a different form, a different role in society, and embodying the mind of Christ. How do we let go of who we think we are, allow ourselves to be filled with God, and then move into service? And that's a constant conversation of border crossing and awareness that I think we can both teach our children and also learn to practice ourselves.
Yes. And we can put this link also on the Facebook page and on the website, but the ELCA does have an intentional ministry at our border with Mexico, and there's a Lutheran disaster response link if someone or their youth group really does want to look into that and become involved. So that link, great. Yes, we'll put that link on Facebook and the webpage along with the artwork, and there was another one. We're keeping a list. Don't worry. Everything. Yeah. Thank you.
Very good. Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to move on to the next slide unless there are some questions. Right. Or, yeah.
Go ahead.
So this is basically the wind-up, right? If look at how this border is built. Look at that wall. And what would it take to cross it? If we confess that Jesus is God incarnate and that therefore God crossed all those limits to be with us, all those limits to create, all those limits to bring out of slavery and oppression, all of those limits to join with us, let's reflect very concretely on what borders separate us from our neighbor and how do we cross them. So some of the folks who are listening have already begun that work and doing some cross-ecumenical kinds of participation. Here on my campus at Cal Lutheran University, we do a lot of work with interfaith. And so how can we help our students from all different religious traditions come together, deepen their own faith, but be willing to try different food, talk about theology in different ways, and then work together for a common cause. For example, support of refugees from Rwanda or something like that. So those are some examples, and we can offer that as well. I think the ELCA Bishop Eaton has brought up the Interfaith Youth Corps and has worked closely to try and help the church think about some ways to engage in interfaith conversations. So there's another way that we can cross borders and do some self-exploration and self-deepening in our faith, but also reach out to the community.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Do we have another slide, or are we at the end?
Dun, dun, dun.
So when God's story of border crossing becomes our story, let's go to the next one. Then we can reach across the boundaries and join with our neighbor. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Are there any final questions? Or Dawn, maybe you have, I've missed something that you can see.
No, well, first of all, thank you so much. It's great. If people are wanting to really dig into this with a middle school group, what kind of resources are out there? Do you have a favorite book or a movie that exemplifies this, or a book that adults could read if they want to look into it and then sort of translate it into middle school language?
Oh, that's a great question. For middle schoolers, wow.
There are so many boundaries in a junior high.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, I think one of the places to start is locally. So one of the exercises I have in the curriculum, and all right, so one of the exercises I have in the curriculum is for the middle schoolers or the junior high or whoever it is to get together and draw the map of their neighborhood.
Wonderful.
And what that means is they have to go explore the neighborhood.
Right.
Right? And
Yes.
you know, have an adult to say what are the safe places, what are the boundaries that we want to look at. And then I think sometimes our youth are our best resource. What kind of boundaries are they thinking about? What is scary to them in, you know, the 5th grade? Or what kind of borders do they see in the lunchroom or on the soccer field or whatever that is? And can they think creatively about how they're going to relate to those borders and boundaries? And some of them are issues of safety. Right?
Yes.
So we need to say, yes, God created borders, and sometimes borders are very important, especially safety borders. I'll have to get back to you on some larger resources, though.
That's totally fine. It sounds like your example, though, of like draw the neighborhood can also reach into upper elementary. They could even be doing that.
Oh, absolutely. And when you do that, the first thing it does is make you aware, right? And that's the first step.
Right.
Let's become aware of who our neighbors are. Maybe they are the people across the street, or maybe they're the church over there. Would it be possible to ask one of the pastors of a nearby congregation if we can come visit their sanctuary? And maybe they'd give us a tour, and maybe we can understand something about how they do their services. So those are important resources too. What are other communities of faith or other Christian congregations doing in our communities that we could tap into or learn from? Yeah.
Wonderful. And someone wrote, great point, Julia. Define your neighborhood before trying anything. Thank you.
Yes. Sometimes the best research is just to walk around and figure out where things are. Yeah.
And then to go really big picture, we have someone on the line that says their sister teaches in a middle school in Malaysia and connects her students with people in other places via Skype. So there might be someone in your congregation that could check into international schools or have some sort of connection that would be able to go across major borders with the students.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of times with our youth, I don't, you know, when I was growing up, we did this, and I went with a couple other youth groups to go across the border in Mexico and do some, you know, VBS or Vacation Bible School or whatever. But to me, what's most important about going somewhere to serve is the service we do when we return home. So I would encourage folks, if you're doing projects with youth where you go, let's say, work on Habitat for Humanity or take blankets to the homeless or whatever it is, clean up graffiti, pick up trash, that's a great thing to do. Just walk around the neighborhood and pick up trash. That's crossing a social border, right? We're not educated to be trash collectors, but it's so important. So what I think when we go do a mission trip, whether it's local or abroad or across the state, what we need to encourage our youth to do is to process the coming home. Remember that Jesus couldn't quite come home to Bethlehem, but his family went up to Nazareth. The landscape will change when our children come home from these experiences. And they're not coming home to the same Bethlehem congregation. They're coming home to a different place with a new understanding of the world. And to give them a place to process that, to communicate that, to articulate what they've experienced in the border crossing, and to, in some ways, empower them to be mini experts. You know what it's like to go do this work with the Episcopalians or the Methodists or the Presbyterians. Great. Let's get our youth together to create something for the adults. Maybe they can lead their parents into thinking about a border crossing or how to go through that kind of experience.
I love that. And then another type of border crossing, if you recall, Samantha has a youth group that has both Episcopal and Lutheran students from 2 different congregations. It's a different kind of border crossing. She asks if you have any advice for crossing borders with her co-leader who is struggling to communicate with the youth.
Wow, so a communication border.
Yes.
Yeah. Since I don't know much about the situation, let me give you my generic default, which is listen, listen, listen.
Yes.
For those of us, and as you, I sort of stumbled over, oh, middle school, how do I do that? I don't teach middle school, right? So I wouldn't know immediately how to do that. But I think we start with ourselves, and we start with listening to them and hearing what they're doing, and trying to listen and hear what the vocabulary is, hear what the concerns are, rather than trying to be the teacher, expert, instructor when we may not feel like we have the tools. As soon as we go to the fake, I'm going to attempt this, the kids sort of are turned off. So Samantha, I don't know if that helps for your situation.
She made another clarification. What about the communication between the 2 of them? Is there a way to break down that border?
Yeah. Go do stuff together.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah. Putt-putt, mini golf, picnic, something where your focus is not on each other and not on your common teaching leadership role, but go do something together that's focused on someone else and see what happens. Wonderful.
Do you have any final comments before the last few announcements that we have?
I don't think so. I tried to, make the moves through 3 different parts of Scripture and then come back to theology of the Incarnation. Wonderful. So if that all came across, then I think...
Then we're good. I think it did. I just didn't want to... I wanted you to get the last word before we go into our announcement.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Dawn. This has been a great treat.
Good. Wonderful. And we're getting a lot of thank yous. People are saying it really resonated with them. So thank you. And thank you all for participating, those who were here live. And, of course, if you want others to listen to this with you, it is on the web page that you see on your screen right now. It's being recorded. Please, please share it. It's at practicediscipleship.org. That's also where we will post the links to the different ministries we've mentioned, as well as the artwork once we have that all gathered into one place. This is for everyone. This is anyone who might resonate. You can share it with your volunteers, with the pastoral staff, anyone who needs to hear it, other leaders of other congregations. Let's cross those borders and share this webinar. There's archived webinars, free curriculum, videos, and then there are also local events. So if you would like to attend this event led locally by a real human in the room, you can find out where those are by going to practicediscipleship.org. So as I was alluding to, each synod in the entire ELCA has a practice discipleship coach who has been trained to lead these seminars. You can also find event dates on our network app for iPhone and Android, and this free app gives you anytime access to videos, network news, a calendar of events, an interactive prayer wall, and much more. It's actually pretty amazing what it does, so check that out. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. That's another place to get these links and to find out about upcoming events. Our Facebook page, you can just search for Practice Discipleship Initiative, and our Twitter is ELCAPD. There's a very quick announcements if you happen to be listening and you are going to the gathering team just wants you to remember a little reminder, if you have any housing questions, please email the gathering team at gathering@elca.org. Do not contact the hotel. They don't know your answer. So they're great. They just, when conventions are taking place, we all handle it ourselves with all the questions. Join the network on March 17th for the Third Tuesday Conversation with Keith Anderson. He'll be talking about social media and ministry. Our next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, April 7th at 1 p.m. Central. The title is Story of Place and Displacement with Carol Jacobson. You see the details there. So thank you for joining us, and thank you again, Julia.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yes.